Um, we have Mary Wheeler available. So Mary, are you there? Mary.
Hi.
Great.
All right.
Hey, Mary.
So
Can you do a quick intro of yourself and then we'll get into your presentation?
yeah, sure. Hi. So thanks, Marty. Thanks for having me on. I'm Mary Wheeler. I'm calling in from Palo Alto, California. I'm going to start by flipping over to a deck, which hopefully will show for you guys. I hope that this is
Can you do a quick intro of yourself as well?
Yep, I will do that in just a sec when I can get this deck up here. There we go. Do you guys see me or a deck?
I see a deck.
Great. Okay. So, yeah, so I hope everyone is feeling safe and healthy. I am going to talk a bit about BioRock Ventures and biopharma, the segment. So that's the segment of investing in novel medicines, treatments for disease, vaccines. And, you know, as Marty pointed out, I think this has particular relevance right now during this pandemic, both for those who might, you know, want to have more impact through their investing, but also as an industry that's relatively insulated from this current economic turmoil. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the biopharma segment, particularly the private investment segment, and then just a little bit about the fund. So as Marty asked, let me introduce myself if I can figure out how to go to the next slide. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So again, my name is Mary. I started my training as a PhD in neuroscience and then did an MBA, so Yale, Princeton, and then MIT. I've been part of a founding startup team, 4 people when we started, that got acquired by Pfizer.
Hey, Mary, we're getting a little bit of feedback on your line. I'm not sure if you're too close to the microphone or what's happening, but.
Okay. I'm not sure. I could try this headset. Let's see if that.
Perfect.
Can you guys hear me better now?
No, it's a little bit difficult. I can hear you, yes. I would go back to what you had before.
Hey, Marty, I don't even know if I'm here anymore.
You're on. Hi, guys. We're going to wait for Mary to get back on. Looks like you're back, Mary. Mary, are you back? Do you hear us?
I can hear you now.
Mary?
Sorry. You want me to
Perfect, great. Keep on going.
Okay, sorry. I don't know where I lost you guys. I'm at sort of my background. Can you hear me okay?
It sounds much better.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I have training both as a scientist and as a business person. I worked at a startup, went through a couple medium-sized pharma companies that were public, Forest, now Allergan, and then J&J, which is a big pharma. I've been an angel investor and advised several dozen startups at C-level or as a consultant. I was a Kauffman Fellow, which means I spent a couple of years working with peers on the business of investing in venture. And now I run a small VC firm called BioRock that invests in biopharma startups. So let me just tell you briefly a little bit about the biopharma space. for those who maybe haven't taken a look in a while, this has been a really good run for biopharma. So maybe another time to take another look. And this is prior to the pandemic. This is what was been happening. So 3 key points. One is it's 3 years to an exit for private biopharma startups. A lot of people have the perception, you know, oh, it takes 20 years to develop a product and $2.5 billion. Well, that's true. No one company does all that work. And so the startups often hand it off through an M&A to a bigger company. So you'll see in the red circle here, the average time to exit has been 3 years, and it's going down. And that's been my personal experience in investing as well, from first money in to exit.
Hey, Mary, we don't see your presentation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, pop it up.
Okay, let's see how we do that. I'll try this again. Can you guys see it? Can you guys?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, can you see the deck?
Yes.
Okay, so, oops, okay. So here's the red circle. You can see the time going down for exit. Next slide. So we have also the same story on the public side. So I guess in tech, they talk a lot about unicorns. Well, the fact is that $1 billion exits are not rare in biopharma. So you don't hear about the unicorns in biopharma. There were 20 of them last year in biopharma, and quite a few in 2018, including Moderna, which is a company that we've seen in the news that, you know, recently started a COVID-19 vaccine trial in March. Their IPO was $7.5 billion. So the biopharma space is doing really well. It's also, some people think of it as kind of a niche or an obscure space. When you think of all of healthcare, there's a variety of segments: biopharma, health tech, which is all the telemedicine startups, which are, you know, very interesting right now. The diagnostics, like the COVID-19 diagnostics we're trying to get access to, and the devices like ventilators. By far the largest segment is the biopharma segment. So this is not a small space. So just checking, can you guys hear and see what I'm saying and what I'm showing?
It looks really good.
Great. Okay. So I think, you know, it's been very recently attractive before the pandemic. Now with the pandemic, as Marty pointed out, one of the things that we're seeing is a lot more non-dilutive funding coming in, particularly to infectious disease and vaccines, which is what you would expect. It had been a high unmet need area. It was underinvested. So now people are coming in and investing. There's also been some regulatory streamlining and just greater willingness to look at this space. So a lot of resources are coming in that maybe hadn't been coming in the past. So for those who are maybe looking at this space again, I will say I've seen a couple of approaches to investing in biopharma. One is to dabble. You know, they know, you know, their friends, fathers, buddies, doctor is in a startup, and so they want to invest in that startup, and they'll come to me asking what I think. And others will stay away from it, knowing that it's complicated and, you know, it's not as intuitive to kind of assess as a public company with, you know, a direct-to-consumer product. You know, I think there's a third way, and, you know, that is basically to hire someone to work full-time for you to assess these different biopharma opportunities. And the reason is that the key thing about making decisions in this space is data. And most of that data, you would need to sign a CDA to review, you know, whether it's the clinical data that's been generated or will be generated in the next trial, or the preclinical science data. You need to look at that. And I would hope that Theranos and other companies would teach us that it's not about whether it's a hot deal or, you know, if there's a number of famous or impressive people around the table. You personally need to dig into that and not take someone else's assurances. So that's a little bit different about biopharma, whether you're doing, you know, public, there's a lot of crossover funds, private companies, even public. You really need to look at that. So I think I'll take a few minutes. I know we lost a few minutes on tech, so I'm just gonna go just talk briefly about BioRock Ventures, which is one of those many options for getting into the space. BioRock Ventures is my fund. It invests in small biopharma startups. We do focus on a specific piece of that, which is putting seed-sized investments into experienced teams. That's because while there's been a large boom in life sciences, both in terms of investment and exits, there's never been and continues to not be enough money for small biopharmas. This has been true my entire career, several decades. So BioRock invests in those companies. I'm going to go straight to the next slide, which shows the blue line at the bottom.
Hey, Mary, what do you mean by small biopharma?
Yeah, so small biopharma are the people raising small amounts of money with few people. They're small in every possible way. They could be developing a novel treatment that could be billions of dollars at the end of the revenue. So the revenue is not what I mean by small. I mean they're being efficient with their capital. There's a lot of reasons why that group, you saw a seed stage startup and VC fund explosion in tech. That just never happened in biopharma. One of the reasons is that the VC funds in life sciences are all very large. Let's see, NEA, Arch, and Flagship all closed $1.5 billion funds in the last weeks. They're all huge. They don't have time to deploy checks under $1 million. It's just a waste of their time. There's a lot of other reasons as well. There have been quite a few COVID-19 companies that are in this segment. So I will say that just briefly in BioRock's portfolio, there is one company, Premium Therapeutics, at the top of the bar here, that is developing a treatment for COVID-19. So that's not a vaccine, that's a treatment. So for people who get sick, it could possibly have applications in prevention as well because it works in the innate immune system. I've also got a long track record of investing in infectious disease from past investments, and another one of BioRock's portfolio companies is also in infectious disease. I'm not, I think we may be having some time for questions. There's a lot of stuff we could talk about here, and I'm super I can't give, investment advice or medical advice, but I do want to leave some time for that. So I'm very happy to give you a copy of this deck of the overview information, which was from Silicon Valley Bank. I can send you the link. Please just send me an email. My email is here, or to just answer questions. So Marty, do you have a way to kind of receive questions, or should I just kind of leave it at that?
People should be able to text questions to you and then go from there.
Okay, so where would I see the questions, or can you read them if I can?
Rob Collarina raised his hand. Rob, do you want to text a message? Rob? So, Mary, I was hoping that maybe you can talk about the general tenor of the environment right now, like with COVID-19 and what you're seeing in terms of the willingness to push these drugs forward, et cetera. Mary, did we lose you again?
You lost me for a second, but I'm back.
Okay, great.
Turn the video off so that we can not lose me again. So are there questions?
Right. The question I had was, what's the general tenor out there at this moment? And you've been in the biopharma area for 20 years, so you survived 2008. What do you think it's going to look like coming out of this?
Yeah, so the tenor within biopharma is everybody is working on this pandemic. Certainly the companies that I've invested in that are in infectious disease all have that skill set, and we are dropping everything to work on this in parallel. All resources are getting pulled to it. Everybody has heads down. It's very hard to reach anybody who is, I'm hearing from people outside of space because they want to help. We are all working on this. When people are looking more, at this point superficially at kind of how is the portfolio doing, it's fine because biopharma moves slowly and steadily forward. There are some more academic labs that are, slowing their pace down. But operations continue. Companies do not need extra support. They are all doing very well. And I think people are just, ready, like they've been working and are happy to deploy their skill set. So it's, I wouldn't say positive, but it's certainly forward looking and proactive. And we are not having to fortify any of our portfolio companies or, give them extra money. We're not feeling that stress. I did see a question come in. Am I personally, or is BioRock looking at things outside of COVID-19? Absolutely. The fund invests in all therapeutic areas and continues to deploy capital both inside and outside that space. So I'm seeing written questions, Marty. Do you want me to respond to some of the written questions?
Yes, please do. Yes.
Okay. So there's a question about diagnostics and devices. And I think maybe, suggestions, perhaps this is a question more about how to attract investors to the space. I'm not actually sure, but just broadly speaking, biopharma and therapeutics is often, someone is characterizing them on the question as sexy. I don't know, actually. I find people are really nervous about biopharma. That's why I say people kind of stay away. And it is a little, I would just say, I would hope that more people would invest in diagnostics in particular, because that has been a particularly neglected area in our healthcare system, and it's certainly in investing until now. And so I would hope that the prospects for diagnostic startups would go way up now that people realize the importance. Any other
Do you
questions?
see much in the area of like artificial intelligence and things along those lines, or for people who are looking at diagnostics or even in biopharma?
So there's been for 5 or 7 years a big push, especially where I am in Silicon Valley, to apply writ large AI. I used to do AI as a PhD, and it's it means a lot of things. Biopharma has always used tools because it is nothing other than an information industry at the end of the day. Right, so they've embraced tools for 50 years. AI is definitely viewed by biopharma, the big codes that I worked at, and my colleagues as yet another possibly useful tool that is, sort of unproven, but people are open to it. I think on the tech side, people see it as a complete breakthrough. I'm not sure that people will see that, do see that on the biopharma side yet, because at the end of the day, we're in the business of biology, which is a system we don't totally understand, and you cannot model the human body yet in toto, so you really cannot replace AI with regular wet lab techniques. So it becomes then a tool, which is yet another tool in the toolkit, and could be neat.
Hey, Mary, you had a question from Rob Collarina about how long did you have a COVID treatment strategy of your treatment company? What's the timing on that, et cetera? Can you just discuss that a little bit?
Sure. So I invest in high unmet need areas. That's what BioRock does. And infectious disease and vaccines has been and probably will continue to be a high unmet need area. So yes, I've invested in companies that are developing treatments for COVID-19. I did that last year, before the pandemic was even here. So I did not have and do not have a COVID-19 strategy. It is a high unmet need investing strategy. And so as long as I see a clear path to an exit, because after all, we're looking for returns, I will be looking in that area. An example that I would say to the contrary would be Alzheimer's disease is also a very high unmet need area. I look at it a lot. It's very hard to see an exit path there because the biology is missing. Somebody's asking me, how do we differentiate pure pharma from biopharma? I think that's actually a great question because, there's like a lot of words like biotech and biopharma. I lump them together. If you are developing a novel medicine to treat a disease, then you're a biopharma. That's what I mean when I say it. You'll see, depending on you know, who's saying it. Maybe it's an investment maker. They'll have their own categories, like they'll call it specialty pharma, which is usually more generics as opposed to novel, like new medicines, and pharma meaning like big, huge corps. I don't, you know, the deck that I just showed you, and again, I'm happy to send that to anybody who wants to look at the underlying data. They're using the term as any size company, public or private, that's developing a medicine, you know, that the FDA would regulate. And that's all we mean there.
Mary, did you want to answer Dan Curran's question about longevity expertise holdings today?
Sure. So longevity is not a disease. Living forever, I assume, is what is implied there. I see a lot of that in Silicon Valley. So that's not the lens I use. There may be certain diseases people get when they're older. I just mentioned Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease, cancer. You tend to get those more as you age, as you do infectious disease. So I am not looking at things with that lens. At the end of the day, you have to get a product through the FDA, and they look for data that shows that you are curing or hopefully eventually preventing a disease. And you have to have an endpoint. And so just the framing of it in terms of living forever, I don't know how you would measure that, right? So it's just a very practical comment. That's just not how I think about it. That's not how most scientists think about it. It's not how most people in biopharma have thought about it, is making people live as long as possible. It's more about healthy lives and quality of life. That's what we tend to focus on. And of course, we go through the lens of the FDA.
I think that I think the issue with longevity is that you know, there's a bifurcation in healthcare, or there's many folks in healthcare, but obviously in the family office space, we see a lot of these longevity focused healthcare, or you know, could be like athletic performance healthcare, et cetera. So those are just, you know, as I said, there's forks in the road from the generic, you know, healthcare, which, you know, the U.S. government is really putting a lot of money into at this moment. So it's very interesting. You had so I wanted to just get one more point, and hopefully we can get closer to a close on this. But you had talked about the time horizon of 3 years, and can you just walk us through a scenario? I mean, are most of your exits going to be you know, buyouts to other companies? You know, you're going to get bought out, or are you going to be IPOing or licensing agreements? Can you, you know, walk through that?
Sure. So an exit is when you get cash back. And in biopharma, there's a lot of earnouts. I would share my screen, but I'm afraid that I will lose you again, so I won't. To go back to that slide, but if you recall the slide that shows the 3 years to exit, that's the M&A, and it does talk about the upfront, which is you know, roughly 250 to 500 million. 80% of BioRock's portfolio is aiming for an M&A exit. That's because that was my area of expertise for 20 years. That's what I did, is buy companies. I do see about half my deal flow is pre-IPO companies, but the exits are usually when the big co buys the small co, whether it's a public or private company. That's the dynamic in biopharma, is that the people that have the money are the big pharmas, because they're the ones that have to build a sales force and manufacture at scale. So they're also the ones that have the billions of dollars. My exits in the past, I've invested in one startup at 2017, and then again follow on in 2018, and then they signed an exit deal in 2019. So that's 2 years. You'll see some of the cash come later, but the M&A is a time when you get hundreds of millions of dollars, and your, you know, 5 to 10x is usually expected at that time. That's what I'm looking for. There may be additional payouts, but those are contingent. They're usually high probability, but I tend to, you know, weight them less. I do not look at licensing is not an exit. It could be a great source of non-dilutive funding, right? Because it's money that comes from a biopharma, so it reduces your your capital spend as an investor. So it's a good thing, but it is not an exit. A license is not an exit. An IPO can be an exit, but often in our space, it still isn't an adequate venture returns exit. So you don't end up, you could IPO your startup, but then it still ultimately gives you the